Hello and welcome everyone to today's video, and today we're going through one of the bigger and wider topics from air law, which is the rules of air. We've prepared 7 questions that have been seen in the latest EASA exams across all authorities. So without any further ado, let's jump into the questions with some more explanations and tips from my side in order to help you understand these topics and do better in your exams. So question number 1. According to SERA, what is the squawk to be set when an aircraft is leaving controlled airspace and does not receive air traffic services? So of course you might have heard of the 3 or today 4 emergency squawk codes, which are 75 men with knife for interference, 76 radio fix for lost communications, and 77 going to heaven, which is the emergency squawk code, of course, 7500, 7600, 7700. And today we also have a new squawk code 7601, which is when you have lost comms and you initiate a diversion. However, there are also 2 extra unusual squawk codes that you need to remember, and these will be 7000 and 2000. The 7000 is the squawk code that is used when you do not receive air traffic services or you're flying simply IFR, meaning you do not have separation provided by the ATC. This squawk code will be set for by you most likely during most of your VFR flights if you are flying in controlled airspaces. However, the second squawk code 2000 is a squawk code when the actual squawk code is not assigned. So for example, if you're flying through controlled airspaces in IFR, however, you were not assigned a squawk code, or you leave a particular authority that stops providing you with the service. The 2000 is also a squawk code. Maybe this will help you remember it, that you will most likely set on the ground right before you get your ATC clearance, and when you have your transponder on standby. And here is a disclaimer that some countries, like for example Italy, doesn't have 2000, but it has the squawk code of 1000 used for the same purpose. So of course, for this case, if you're leaving a controlled airspace and you do not receive the AT services, of course 7000 will be the squawk code set by you. For question number 2, an IFR rated pilot wants to fly between 2 European aerodromes 100 nautical miles apart. Weather conditions are VMC, meaning visual meteorological conditions, during the flight according to SERA. Under which rules can the flight be performed? So of course, this question is not completely full. However, I believe without going too deep and overthinking it, this flight can be done in 2 ways. Of course, it can either be flown as VFR, as most flights are, or it can be flown as IFR as well. Remember that IFR simply means that you're flying with instrument flight rules and you're provided with the separation by the controllers if you're flying in these controlled airspaces. This allows you to fly in IMC. However, it does not require you to fly in IMC. Many times you can see airliners fly in perfect conditions with the ground in sight, and always the flight plan will be IFR rather than a VFR. Here, of course, you need to remember that if you're flying in uncontrolled airspaces like Gulf only, for example, then you are not required to file a flight plan. However, it is always my tip to do so, because filing a flight plan will provide you with search and rescue, which you won't have if you do not file one. So, of course, this flight can be technically flown VFR or IFR depending on the different aerodromes. And of course, for a flight, entire flight to be flown in IFR, you need to have specific departure procedures at your departure airport and arrival and approach procedures at your arriving airport. Otherwise, you might need to fly or change the flight plan from IFR to VFR or vice versa at some point of the flight, which is also possible and doable. However, generally speaking, all flight plans can be flown. All flights can be flown in that way. And now for question number 3. ATC issue an aircraft of a clearance to follow a standard instrument departure. As part of this SID, the aircraft is required to climb to 6,000 feet by 10 nautical miles from the aerodrome. The aircraft is not able to do this because of performance limitations. What actions should be taken by the pilot in command to assure a safe departure at the planned time? So remember that all departure procedures or departure charts will have the required gradients that need to be maintained by you in order to be legally and safely allowed to fly this. The ATC does not know your performance, and most certainly they will not check your performance. So it is on you and it is your responsibility. So what happens if during your departure clearance, you get your clearance for a set departure, and then when you calculate performance, it shows you that you are not able to maintain a certain gradient, or which is much more common, you'll see that, for example, in case of an engine failure, you will not be able to maintain the gradient which is required to be maintained with one engine inoperative. Well, in that case, you are not legal or safe to fly the SID. So first thing you should do is to inform the ATC. And some charts actually will have a disclaimer that if you are unable to comply, please contact the ATC. And the ATC in most cases will either approve you to fly this in any case, because in that case, if you declare an emergency, they are able to give you vectors away from the dangerous zones, or they will give you a different departure, or they will give you vectors during departure that will make sure that you're safe of terrain or other obstacles. So of course, in this case, what you should do is you should inform the ATC that you are unable to fly this, and then the ATC will revise this clearance. They will give you, they will give you an amended clearance if this is possible and practicable in order to support you. And if this is not possible, then you'll not be able to depart at that time, and you might need to offload your aircraft to achieve better performance. For question number 4. Which of the following statements is true about psychoactive substances and their use by pilots? So, CAT MPO 170 talks about this in EASA Easy Access Rules. I'll show you the document in just a second. However, just so you know, remember that psychoactive substances, as well as the drugs, alcohol, everything that falls into that bucket, should never be used by pilots, generally speaking, as they can hurt your general health. However, you're not forbidden from using them in your free time unless it encroaches on your duty. So remember, you can never, ever, ever fly when you're under influence of any psychoactive substances, including alcohol. However, by law, there is a set definition of when you should stop drinking before your duty. So you as a pilot should never drink at least 8 hours before your duty. Most airlines will increase it to 10 or 12 hours. And you should, as a pilot by law, have no more than 0.05 promils of alcohol in your blood. Most airlines, however, will also require you to have 0, which is, in my opinion, the safest and best course of action. However, remember that just because you're supposed to stop drinking by law 8 hours or taking any substances 8 hours before the flight, it doesn't mean that you can take too much and come to work intoxicated or under the influence. It only means that your last drink, whether it is 5 or 1 beers or anything else, cannot be taken at that certain time. However, of course, the underlying issue here and the underlying consequence is that you should never, ever, ever come to work and be on duty under the influence, which I believe is part of the common sense. Here I also have the part of the document, CAT-GEN MPA 170 Psychoactive Substances from Easy Access Rules from EASA, that I highly recommend that you check out if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the topic, or for that matter, most of the aero topics. Here, however, that states that the operator has to ensure that no person enters or is in the aircraft when under the influence of psychoactive substances to an extent that the safety of the occupants is likely to be endangered, and this is applicable for both the crew and, of course, the passengers. And for question number 5, a flight is operating in IMC under IFR exactly on the current flight plan route. At certain time, the radio controller gives you a following instruction: turn heading 050, maintain heading 050 until further advised. The message is acknowledged. Then, 1 minute later, you lose your communications and you cannot re-establish radio communications. What do you need to do? And of course, this again touches into the lost comms procedure. So what do you do if you are on vectors given by the ATC, which is due to many different things, for example, aircraft separation? Well, the first thing you should do after sending your squawk code to 7600 is to rejoin your flight plan, meaning you return to your current flight plan route. You are required to maintain the current level and speed. However, if you are on vectors, you need to rejoin at your to your current flight plan route at the earliest convenience, but not later than your next significant point. There is also a 20-minute rule in the radar airspace, which essentially states that you should continue on the present speed and level for 20 minutes in radar airspace and 7 in procedural airspace. However, today there is no more 7-minute rule. EASA has changed it last year. Now we are only supposed to maintain the level and speed for 20 minutes after losing communications, and the timer starts the moment you set your squawk to 7600. However, if you are on VMC, the rules now require you to land at the nearest adequate aerodrome, and this is when you would set the squawk code to 7601. For question number 6, two aircraft are converging at approximately the same altitude. Aircraft A has aircraft B on its right. Which aircraft has the right of way? So of course, this is the same as driving a car. The car on the right and the aircraft on the right side has right of way, meaning if the aircraft A has aircraft B on its right, the aircraft B here will have the priority. Remember also that if you have two aircraft on the same altitude and course converging, then the avoidance should always be done to the right, so both aircraft go to the right. Generally speaking, the aircraft on final approach, and that is lower, will have priority over other aircraft that are higher. And of course, all of this does not extend beyond the basic priority in the air, meaning that emergency aircraft always have the highest priority. Then we have the unpowered aircraft, balloons, then we have the gliders that are controllable, then we have airships, and then we have only the powered aircraft that are on the lowest side of the air priority. And also remember, which is a good way to remember the lights on the aircraft, you might remember that aircraft have navigation lights, so you have red on the left and green on the right. Easy way to remember it is that if you see another aircraft's green light from the side, this is a green light for you, meaning you have priority. If you have the red light of the other aircraft inside, that means that you have to give way because this aircraft is on your right side. And now for the last question about these lights again. According to SERA, in normal situations, what lights should be turned on for an aircraft in flight at night? So of course, this question again touches onto this. I will show you an image that we have posted on Instagram some time ago about aircraft lights. You can see the aircraft collision lights will usually be strobes or beacons. You have the runway turn-off lights in the front nose, navigation lights, as I mentioned, red on the left, green on the right, as well as many other lights that are required by aircraft to have. However, by law, you are only required to have anti-collision lights and navigation lights, because under the word anti-collision, we have the lights such as beacon and strobes legally encompassed. So this will be absolutely the correct answer for an aircraft to have at night. These need to be turned on. The navigation lights will also need to be turned on during the day. And this will be everything that I have here for today. If you'd like to see more similar questions, then I highly encourage you to download the Airhead app and register an account on the website, which will be linked underneath this video. Thank you so much for joining and tuning in. I wish to see you in the next video. And of course, as always, I wish you all the best in your upcoming air law and ATPL exams. Until next time, have a fantastic day and bye-bye.